thousands of pupils in England could be forced to start their term with remote learning once again.
Oh dear, that's because over 100 schools, colleges and nurseries were told to shut some buildings with concrete that's prone to collapse until safety work's been done.
Yeah, ministers have been urged to provide more clarity on the scale of the problem, and the Welsh Government says it's now going to survey its own schools to see if they're safe.
Yeah, nobody seems to really know how big this problem is,
No.
but it is big, and it's been there for a long time. And so you might ask, why now? Why didn't they raise this, at the beginning of the summer holidays? Why now? Well, joining us is political commentator John Ashmore. Very good morning to you. Happy first of the month. But parents are looking forward to getting their kids back to school, and suddenly we have this problem. How do you see it at the moment? As I was saying, I'm just thinking, why now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a parent myself, so I can definitely sympathise with how people are feeling this morning. And it's just come at such late notice, as you say. I mean, the overall number of schools affected is not massive. It's about 100 in the whole country. But the thing that concerns me about this is that it might just be the tip of the iceberg, because there's about more than a third of schools in England that are past their designed lifespan. So that's 9,000 schools where they were designed to last a certain amount of time, and they've already passed that. So this issue is about something called reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, RAAC. It was very commonly used in the sort of end of the 20th century to build lots of different kinds of buildings. And according to the government's own press release, there's a risk of collapse, which is not something parents want to hear about their kids' school buildings so soon before the start of term. As you say, politically speaking, the issue is just it's so late. We're talking about having kids back in online learning like they did during COVID, or just not being able to go to school for another week. It's going to throw people's childcare plans into disarray. It's a really, really poor bit of news from the government.
As you say, it's all about the timings. We haven't had any clarity. We're going to talk to the schools minister in this hour to try and get some clarity off him. But it's this whole idea that this is a problem which has literally only just been identified. That would seem to be the issue. And we're hearing from Wales, of course there is a Labour government in Wales, where they say they're going to start looking at the problem now.
Yeah, it seems bizarre, doesn't it? Because they've known that this material is in schools for decades. I mean, since 1994, people have known that this is a problem. And we had schools close in April and June of this year. So the idea that this is some kind of bolt from the blue simply doesn't pass muster. We've literally had schools close earlier this year with exactly this problem. So I'd be very interested to watch your interview with the minister. I appreciate ministers have an enormous amount on their plate, especially in education. There's tons of things going on all the time. But it just strikes me as bizarre that they haven't managed to get ahead of this problem, and that we're now, 3 days before the start of term, and people are having to scrabble around like this. It just it sends a very poor message to parents.
And it's going to have an effect on that generation of children again who've already been through enough. I mean, and some parents must be absolutely in despair over the fact that they might have to, as you say, completely reorganise themselves and face sort of lockdown learning again. It's indescribable incompetence for somebody, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know where the sort of the buck stops. I would just say, I mean, it's not the scale of this is not enormous. It's not like every kid is going to be sitting at home like in COVID doing online learning. It is a small number of schools. That does not take away from the fact that for kids who are in those schools and their parents, it's, as you say, it's going to be awful. Hopefully it will be resolved fairly quickly as well. But, as I said in my first answer, my concern is that this is just the start. It's just the tip of the iceberg. Our school estate in general is in really bad condition. 90%, give or take, of school buildings in England have asbestos in them, which is fine as long as it's not disturbed. But personally, that's not really a risk I'd be particularly wanting to take with my own children. And it's there's a wider problem here with the UK and the way we do infrastructure and building and so on. So much of our kind of public realm is creaking. It's either not even just from the late 20th century. We've got still Victorian infrastructure. If you've ever been on a train north of the Watford Gap, you'll have seen how slow we've been to rebuild or refurbish things. So it's a symptom of a much broader problem, I would say.
Why do you think it's been announced in the way it has? Because, as you say, this isn't a new problem. It was 1950s they started putting this stuff in. Presumably there are no schools that are facing imminent collapse, because they would have been aware of that a long time ago.
Except there was one that did suffer a collapse, wasn't there?
Well, there was.
And luckily, it was during the holidays.
But even so, the fact that they've announced it rather than quietly getting on with it seems that there's something else going on, doesn't it? Or is it just that they're scared of being caught out?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to say without going through the kind of decision chain at the Department for Education. As you say, the National Audit Office, it sounds strange because it sounds like a financial sort of reporting body, but they did a report on this before and highlighted that there was a risk that a certain number of buildings were likely to collapse, as you say. I mean, you expect it's mainly a precautionary measure and they're kind of trying to get ahead of it. I suspect it's just one of those things that has somehow managed to fall down the kind of priority list. Frankly, the government has so many things that are in kind of crisis and disarray at the moment that it's quite easy to see how things could slip through the cracks. I wouldn't be surprised if there were other kind of long-term problems being shunted to one side and having the can kicked down the road like this because, the government's still trying to sort out small boats and inflation and the NHS waiting list, which continues to rise, by the way, and all these other things. So I think it's one of the sort of offshoots of a government that's just generally in kind of disarray.